tools and frameworks that um, you've looked into that helps you convey the value of your work to
Design
people?
leadership is still not very good.
Besides having a mindset of openness and experimentative nature, we need to have really good skills in mapping things out.
Hey guys, I'm Junaiza Niazi, author of Navigating Service Design, and joining me is the incredible Sharan Longani. Together, we're on a mission to connect you with the brightest minds practicing service design. In today's musing, we have Nurul Ibrahim, founder of HUME Design Consultancy, a global strategic design firm based out of Indonesia. She has 16 years of international experience, which includes engagement with Ernst Young, Asian Development Bank, Traveloka, Unilever, Indonesia's Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, United Nations Pulse, up to Bloomberg Impact Center, New York. Nurul specializes in design thinking practices, design research of everyday people, and design strategies that support digital experience to business transformations in service and organizational change. Thank you, Nurul, for joining us.
Hi, Janeza and Sharon. Thank you for having me.
Excited to have you in this podcast, but before we get into the serious topics, Sharon and I really want to know, was there a project that helped you have this aha moment regarding designing services and why it matters to people?
I think early in my career, there was a moment where we did a project for shrimp farmers, and we worked with these incredible students from a university, University Gajah Mada here, and they were innovating on how to make the pH balance more visible for these farmers. And what we did was we explored collaborating with them, talking to them on the field, and even seeing how the system works. And so that's when I thought, oh, actually, if we can design around that and help them to achieve, efficiency, then a better system could introduce a better livelihood for them. So that's when I started to become really, really interested in designing for systems. I wasn't thinking from a service point of view yet, but as I've evolved the practice, then human centeredness and service design became a lot more closer in the practice and more widespread and more known. Then I started to learn that it's essential to think about services as a key component to designing ecosystems, and ecosystems exist in every function that we enter into. So it's just something I think inseparable. We need to think things from that holistic kind of view.
The value system of HUME being purpose-centered design, we wanted to know, how did this value system become intrinsic to your work?
There's a really good book on purpose meeting practice. It actually is called How Purpose Meets Practice. And I think the idea of companies existing needs to be rethought, right? Why do we need a lot of these companies? Companies have a huge influence and power on the world. I read in that book how a good organization understands the stakeholders are not the people and management. Real stakeholders are people who contribute, who benefit from the companies and how the company exists. That includes society, that includes the employees. So I really see a huge connection in how we could design ecosystems, and service design is really key to mobilizing all of that.
So when HUME is picking these projects, specifically service design projects, can we delve into how do you help stakeholders find purpose in there?
I think when we receive projects, there's a lot of gaps or assumptions around if we do this, then this will happen, right? There's an expectation of outcome and result, which is not wrong, but we as designers, we always come in with a blank slate and curiosity. Is this the right way to do things, and are we assuming the right thing? Because sometimes a lot of the briefs that come to us expect that designers will directly impact this or like change this to make this kind of result. When we look at the problem space, we might see that it's not what we thought it was before. And so how we try to approach this understanding is to open up their minds first, that we might need to unlearn a lot of things. We might need to remove a lot of these assumptions and maybe really open up our minds and expectations that what we think is the issue could be something completely different. And we try to make sure we're aligned on that. So there's a lot of discussions in the beginning where these are the possibilities that could happen. We even have like a map. We create this map of possibilities where this could happen, that could happen, and how are we going to navigate around that? There's even one of our practices was inspired also by Edward de Bono, the 6 thinking hats. So we try to do like a really mini design thinking kind of workshop or conversation, at least conversation starter, to align with them, these different kind of thinking. What happens if we are expecting really positive results? What happens if something goes wrong and it's not what we expect? What happens if something is really negative? So these are things that we try to align. And of course, clients are humans, but that conversation is very important in the beginning so that we don't lose the expectations, and we don't we make sure that our process is very explorative. That's what we try to do in the beginning.
Said about stakeholder management, and generally stakeholders are customers, societies, ecosystems that's getting impacted. But when we have a stakeholder meeting, there is nobody representing them. So how do you do stakeholder management when there aren't the stakeholders that we're representing in that meeting or in that system?
I think there's 2 layers, right? I could speak from the example here in Indonesia. Indonesia has roots in tradition and hierarchy that cannot be erased. That's something in a lot of, I think, Asian cultures still exists, right? So I think it's not about changing that, but acknowledging that, and then see how we can leverage those things. So example, people who are in the top level expect to be in the top level and do their decision makings. So we acknowledge that. But how to make the rest of the team heard, that's key. And I think a lot of the design exercises, there's so much tools can introduce that connection. So there's many different ways we have explored it in the past. Those sessions and workshops and connecting like a CEO with somebody from HR they never worked with before is really important, because they then are forced to meet and work together as a team. And so that kind of sessions are really valuable. And then facilitating how we can make sure their discussion is also not one-sided and the other people are heard. So designers have really good skills in making sure every people and every kind of people are part of this, and I believe that's also human-centered, right? The facilitation process too. So those things have worked in the past. Crafting it until we come to a concrete area or concrete statement, or whatever the vision, that takes some time. That takes some time for people to open up and make sure that this is what they believe in as well. But I think it's good for CEOs to be open and to listen. This is what your staffs or employees are saying as well, and their concerns and them raising concerns have relevancy to their companies too. And good leadership will listen.
I wanted to share the book excerpt that we wanted to base the conversation on. And so there was this paragraph on navigating service design, which really stuck with us. It says, unlike constructing a building, service design is not a domain that has a tangible output. It is a constant effort to keep the experience intact, irrespective of the change in circumstances. So it encompasses the design of all human to human and human to machine interactions involved in the service. So there seems to be a lot of touch points as service designers that we work with. So we wanted to know, is there a project that HUME had an opportunity to work where the systems were very complex, there were a lot of touch points, and you guys had to navigate that? Could you share an insight or a case study of a project that HUME has worked in?
So many. Top of my mind, I could think about two, and they are both in a combination of the commercial sector and the, I guess, with like government sector as well. So like I said, this is why for me, I believe service design is very much connected to systems, and it's really key to understand different layers and ecosystems of how the world works. The first one, the biggest one that we did was so complex, we took a whole year and a half to do, was we had a brief to design a training service for the renewable energy sector, which is a very broad brief. And the idea is to increase the capacity and skills of people who are working in energy companies, so that they could meet a really high goal, which was a net zero goal in the far future. And we just thought there was such a ambitious brief. That was such an ambitious brief, and how are we supposed to reach that? How does even human capital achieve that goal? When there are so many other areas that we, coming into the project, we believe are still not done very well. For example, who controls the energy system here, and who makes the policy on green energy? And so, and how strong is that with the existing policies of coal usage and fossil? And so, and what is the global goal and what is the local goal? What are all these goals? So that was so complex for us, because first of all, at that time, the North Star of green energy was not set. Nobody was driving that, and we're going around asking who's supposed to drive. But then we had to map out different areas. From universities, we talked to professors, we talked to experts, we talked to C-level management people, we talked to HR, we talked to all these different representatives of energy companies. And then the training, like teachers, trainers, instructors, what's competency mean to them too, and there's the touch points of competencies were so scattered, it was buried. There are formal competency tests, something like how engineers receive tests, so that they could express that they are capable to do a certain skill set, and then years of working. So we mapped out all of this and saw it was so complex. Every energy sector itself had its own unique way of doing, and it has its own unique way of measuring competency. Some companies would have 6 months internship, some would have 1 year long internship, so that they could make sure the staffs who are going to drive some construction are actually meeting the right requirements, and especially with safety. But by that time, innovation has already increased, right? I mean, innovation operates at a very, very fast pace. So in 3 months, it could be something completely new, and by 1 year time, are the skill sets they have relevant anymore? So those were key things that we learned were so complex. And the other are the decision makers, because decision makers at the end go back to government, people who are making the policies or competencies, in the education sector. So what we learned was companies are taking their own lead. They're independently creating their own training systems, and they're creating their own way of doing, so that they don't need to adhere to the pace that the government is working on. And governments are also looking at global standard. How should we make sure our policies are at that standard? And what they need to push are bills, right? They need to make sure this bill go through a lot of legislative and things like that. So it's a lot of different touch points, a lot of systems in order to meet good competencies and what that good means. So what we discovered was, again, uniting all of that needed a strong facilitation. That's why we believe when we saw all these complexities, if people are not understanding what their purpose and goals are, they can't operate in that way. Even people who are stuck with bureaucracies in the government, we cannot blame them too. They're just following a system, right? So how can we optimize what they're doing to contribute to this mission? How can we optimize how companies are doing to optimize this mission? And we did a facilitation where we combined all of these people, from representatives of the government, C-level people, lecturers from local to abroad. They were in one room, and we mapped it out together. What would be the ideal vision for these communities, for them to meet the good competencies? And we moved away from that net zero whatever goal, and into something more tangible, which is how can they achieve enough knowledge to do A and to do B, so that they could become eligible and be able to be accepted in good energy companies, and they could have a good career pathways too. So those were key, and we faced a lot of resistance from certain people. Some people who thought they've already done a lot of groundwork and didn't want that work to be disturbed. So it was really interesting. They were part of the entire process, but by the end they were like, please don't change anything. And this hesitancy was jarring to us, was really shocking to us. But then how we navigated was, we then map it out. Why is it important? What is the fear around this? And we had those really human conversations with them, and stop looking at them as stakeholders, or like, the dots in the service. We looked at them as people who are really afraid of change. And so those are the key things, I think, that I could share as our learnings.
That's a very challenging project for a service designer, because to see the change in the system or the service that you're designing would take time, would take a lot of people to come together. In a project like this, who is initiating that this particular project has to be done in this specific way, and who is the owner for it? Is there ownership, or do people step back once HUME or a consultancy or an agency picks up a project like this and ask the designers to figure this out for them?
Yeah, I always say this. Even our designers were really confused during the process. It's not any different as designing transformation within a company too. If you're working in a big company with a lot of moving parts and a lot of employees that have maybe worked there for a long time, there are people who might be comfortable in the way they're doing something, even if it's not effective, right? So the way I see it is, this could happen in any sector, in any way, regardless it is a company government, anything, you know? That's a really good question also, because we also asked, like, who is supposed to be driving this?
Yeah.
Even if we had those exercises of who's doing what, there were times where we had to take the initiative. Otherwise, we won't move. We can't see progress in our projects. You know, we're still a consultancy running with time, right? So we need to see these changes. Sometimes they're asking us to just take a minute and stop, which is for us. How can we do that? As a business, we're running on a billing model, so it's just something we need to recognize, you know. And so, but things like that happen sometimes in the middle of transformation goals or processes. There's a halt because we need to see, what do we do? Are we doing the right thing? If we change this, what are the consequences, right? You know, it might be the consequences are too big, you know, like the policy issue is not something we have experience with. We don't design around that. We design around systems and services. So who's going to take the lead on that? Nobody in the company is a minister. So how on earth are we going to do that, right? And how we're going to influence that they need to do that change. And so it's really about aligning these kind of situations and changes with their language and recognizing how they understand things. And when I say language, I mean the key words that they use. There's no way they will understand. We need to do a service design transformation. We need to tell them, you know, these are risks and consequences. If we don't do A, the possibilities are B. The possibilities could be C, and so on. So we need to act on it. We need to change this, you know. And how do we know if it's successful? We don't know. We need to tell them that this is something we don't know. What we can do is try and test it out. And that's where we are confident in, because we're good at experimenting. So if you want to take the risk, then join us and see the result of this. So there's a lot of that kind of conversation, evidence-based practices, and just making sure there's movement and progress, even if there are some issues of resistance.
Yeah.
You mentioned that while you were in the project, the context changed with advancements in the energy sector. So when such a thing happens, how do you pivot the approach and how do you go about continuing from there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think documentation is so important. This is why I believe designers, besides having a mindset of openness and experimentative nature, we need to have really good skills in mapping things out and documenting every single process, every single thing, up to the words, and up to what is agreed upon in every single step, you know, so that we can see what has transpired in the past also, and the people who are working with us can also see that. And so I'm always big on documenting and explaining processes.
I just want to dial back a little bit where you said that during the entire project, the designers were a little confused that who is leading this and where that initiative is. I feel like a lot of the times most designers feel that when they're working in such open-ended projects with multiple stakeholders, and especially when you're coming from design schools, we've done a lot of projects where we are making that change and we are the decision makers, and then suddenly you come into the real world and your voice is not as strong as you thought it was. There are so many other voices that matter and we are mostly in the backseat. How has that changed? How have you addressed that? What is the expectation that a designer should have when they're getting into these projects?
Yeah, for me, there's two things. This is why the role of design leaders is very important. A good leader will know how to empower the team and help them navigate through all these different complexities, and also provide concrete support on, you know, their way of thinking and their mental states during the whole complex processes. I would say leadership and design leadership is really key. I would suggest to invest in building you before changing everything around the world, because this world is just a really sometimes a terrible place, I think. But there's so much positive things, right? When you see all these people mobilizing this change, and if you come up fresh and are still absorbing different value system, uh, there's a tendency that you can get lost in it and see, is this supposed to be here? Well, how come in that space or in that company it works like this? How come that company works like that? I'm going to move around until I find what is ideal to me. And sometimes you won't until you recognize your own value system and how you can contribute. So I would suggest with designers to invest in your own self, optimize how you see things and optimize your skills, and optimize how you can leverage confidence and fail a lot. Be brave in trying out and failing a lot, because in order to get somewhere, you can't just make one beautiful thing and then expect people to follow you. You're gonna face a lot of failures first.
Yeah, it's a very powerful statement that you mentioned, that you need to invest in yourself and build yourself before you try to solve someone else's problems or pain points. So, as a design leader, is your initiative to have the design clinic an initiative to help young designers to see different problems that's there in the world? Like, what triggered? Also, tell us what design clinic is for the audience, and this
Okay.
amazing initiative that you're running.
Design Clinic came about for us to bring more awareness on the practice of human-centered design. It then evolved into bringing more awareness on service design, because that area, like I mentioned, is not something known yet to the industry very well. And so the way we introduce this is through learning by doing, so people learn by practical means. And we'll create case studies that we have explored on our own. So outside of our client projects, when we have time, we would look at all these societal problems around us, and use that. How can we solve this? And it might be looking at a space where we need to connect different sectors. And so the space for doing design clinics is an invitation for, like I mentioned, the government, design enthusiasts, people who want to learn about design, or even the private sector, to collaborate together and solve something, And the place could be a place for discussions, bridging and connecting different types of professionals. But essentially, the goal is to introduce how design can solve a problem, or even systems problem specifically. But now I think as Design Clinic has evolved, interest has been primarily from the design community or people who are enthusiastic about design, and we're very much open to respond to that. So a lot of designers come to learn about service design in that space, and we're trying to do our best to make a really good maybe curriculum for that. We try to make sure there's a real case and real data, and then we bring that to the public, and they can gain skills, new knowledge, or just bring different perspectives, and even us, we learn from them too. So that's the space of design.
That's a very fabulous initiative that you're running. I hope more designers have design leaders like you, who is helping them see and grow as individuals, because to see change, it takes time. And to have that patience, you need a good design leader leading you. So I really hope that more people, even in India, it's a very new field. Design leadership is still not very good. People are still figuring it out, how to lead, how to get design teams to have a voice in business meetings and these kind of spaces. So it's really nice to have someone who's figured this out to help us understand how we could do it as well. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us and your journey with us. There's a lot for us to learn from the efforts that you are putting in to build the service design community in Indonesia.
Too, you're doing amazing with your book too. It's very inspiring.